The day my father's will was read was the day my stepmother slapped me in front of the family lawyer. She thought it was the final blow, erasing me from the house, the company, the Calder name. But as the sting flared on my cheek, my grandfather cleared his throat. He asked the lawyer to add one more page. It wasn't new. It was the page I'd helped him prepare for an entire year, and as it unfolded, their perfect world began to shatter. My name is Lena Calder. The conference room at Harrington and Wells is on the 42nd floor, and on a clear day, you can see the sharp, indifferent peaks of the Front Range. Today, Denver is smothered in a cold, high-altitude haze, and the glass walls just reflect our own expensive, tense faces. The table is a single, polished slab of mahogany, so long it feels like a battlefield. The air is cold, smelling faintly of lemon oil and old money. I sit at the far edge, a deliberate island. My chair is the only one with a small gap separating it from the others. I'm wearing a simple charcoal gray suit, the one I wear to client meetings. It feels like armor. At the center of the table, like a queen holding court, is my stepmother, Vivian. Her grief is impeccable, a tailored black dress from a designer I do not recognize, a single, tasteful strand of pearls. Beside her, slumped in his chair as if the weight of his new importance is already too much, is my stepbrother, Chase. His suit is too new, his tie too loud. They are flanked by distant cousins and various family hangers-on, a silent chorus of vultures dressed in mourning. At the head of the table, silent and almost translucent, sits my grandfather, Edward Calder. Mr. Harrington, the family's lawyer for 3 decades, adjusts his glasses. The sound of the thick, creamy paper crackling is the only sound in the room. He begins to read the last will and testament of my father. Thomas Calder, patriarch of Calder Ridge Developments. His voice is a dry monotone, a river of legalese that washes over me. I hear the words, but they do not connect. Being of sound mind, hereby declare all my worldly possessions. It feels like I'm listening to the financial report of a stranger's life. To my beloved and devoted wife, Vivian Calder, Harrington reads, and the atmosphere in the room tightens. I watch Vivian press a delicate, black-gloved finger to the corner of her eye, a perfectly rehearsed gesture of sorrowful gratitude. The will grants her the primary family residence, the art collection, the majority share of Calder Ridge, and controlling interest on the board. She is, for all intents and purposes, the new Thomas Calder. Her hand, no longer dabbing at a dry eye, rests on Chase's wrist. Her red lacquered nails are a stark splash of color against his white cuff. It is a coronation. Harrington turns a page. His voice falters, just for a fraction of a second, a subtle dip in cadence that only I would notice. To my daughter, Lena Calder, he says. I focus on the way the weak sunlight catches a water glass on the table. I leave a monthly allowance in the sum of $5,000 to be paid from the estate's general fund for her lifetime, provided she does not contest this will. A pause. I can feel every eye in the room pivot to me. $5,000. It is an insult dressed up as generosity. It is what my father paid for his monthly membership at the country club. Harrington continues, his voice now moving quickly, as if to get past the awkwardness. This allowance constitutes the entirety of her inheritance. No shares in Calder Ridge Developments, no properties, and no voting rights on the family board are conferred. I am not a daughter. I am a remote employee, a line-item expense, a problem solved with a small, recurring payment. A small smile plays at the corners of Vivian's mouth. She leans toward Chase, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry across the mahogany expanse. The Aspen house is finally ours. Darling, we can start the renovations immediately. That dreadful rustic furniture she liked can finally go. Chase snorts, a wet, unpleasant sound. About time. They wait. Everyone waits. They are waiting for the scene they have imagined for years. They are waiting for Lena Calder, the quiet, mousy daughter, to finally break. to cry, to scream, to beg for scraps. It is the drama they paid for. I do not move. I do not cry. I do not even look at them. I just continue to watch the light on the water glass. The silence I offer is louder than any scream I could have uttered. It is not the reaction they wrote in their script, and it infuriates them. Vivian's perfectly modulated mask of grief begins to crack. Her voice, no longer soft, cuts through the room. "Well, Lena, nothing to say?" she asks, all pretense of a grieving widow gone. "I should think you'd be grateful. 5,000 a month is more than you could ever earn on your own, with that little numbers job you do." I remain silent. "So ungrateful," she continues, her voice rising. She is standing now, performing for the cousins. "After everything Thomas did for you, after everything I did, we took you in, raised you, and this is the thanks we get. You were always a leech, living off his goodwill. You are not a Calder. You do not deserve the name." Chase, emboldened by his mother, leans forward on his elbows. "Don't worry, Lena," he smirks. "We won't kick you out of your apartment immediately. We're not monsters. We'll give our future tenant, say, 30 days' notice?" He laughs. The cousins titter nervously. I finally turn my head. Slowly, I do not look at Chase. I do not look at Vivian. I look at Mr. Harrington, the lawyer, the only person in the room who represents the law, however flawed. My voice is low, but it cuts through their laughter. It is time to separate what is mine and what is not. It is not a plea, it is a statement of fact. It is not what she expected. Vivian's face, a carefully constructed mask of high society poise, shatters. Her eyes widen, and something dark and ugly, something I have seen in private but she has never shown in public, flashes to the surface. She moves before anyone can react. The scrape of her chair on the hardwood floor is violent. She rounds the table in 3 quick strides. I do not flinch. I just watch her come. The sound of her hand hitting my face is a dry, sharp crack. It is not a slap. It is a blow, delivered with the full force of her body, her heavy gold rings connecting with my cheekbone. The sound echoes off the glass walls. The entire room freezes. The lawyer's mouth hangs open. One of his assistants, standing by the wall, makes a small, strangled sound. The city of Denver, 42 floors below, seems to go silent. My head snaps to the side, a blossom of white-hot. Stinging fire erupts on my skin. I can smell her perfume, an expensive, cloying scent, suddenly suffocating. On the table, the water in my glass vibrates, tiny concentric rings shivering on its surface. This is the moment, the raw animal violence they have hidden behind civilized dinners and polite insults, finally laid bare for the world to see. I do not cry. I do not raise my hand to my stinging face. Slowly, deliberately, I turn my head back to face her. I look directly into her eyes, which are wide and panting, shocked at her own loss of control. A new sound breaks the absolute stillness. A dry, quiet clearing of a throat, a hem. In the dead silence of the room, it sounds like a cannon shot. Every eye in the room pivots. My grandfather, Edward Calder, who has not said a word, who has seemed like a ghost at the head of the table, is sitting up straight. His eyes, usually clouded with age, are suddenly, shockingly clear. He looks at me. He looks at the red mark blooming on my face. Then he looks at Vivian, his expression unreadable. He reaches down to the old, worn leather briefcase at his feet. With a slow, deliberate hand, he pulls out a single, thin, sealed manila envelope. It looks ancient next to the embossed stationery of the will. He slides it across the polished mahogany. It glides silently, stopping directly in front of Mr. Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," my grandfather says. His voice is not the frail rasp of an old man. It is the firm, steady voice of the man who built an empire from Colorado dust. "You will now open the addendum, the one we agreed upon and had notarized last year." Mr. Do. Harrington stares at the envelope as if it is a snake. his hand, when he reaches for it, is visibly trembling. He looks from my grandfather to Vivian, who is frozen, her hand still slightly raised, her face a mask of utter confusion. She still does not understand. She has no idea that the sound of her rings hitting my skin was the trigger. It was the, in case of emergency, break glass moment. It was the trigger, the firing pin, that just activated a clause she never knew existed, a trap we had spent an entire year setting. That slap was inevitable. It was the result of a pressure that had been building for 20 years, a crack in the foundation of the house that everyone pretended was perfect. The Calder Mansion, as the local magazines called it, is not a home, it is a statement. Set back from the manicured roads of Cherry Creek, it hides behind elaborate, scrolling wrought iron gates that open with a heavy pneumatic sigh. The lawn is a carpet of impossible green, mowed into diagonal submission. The living room, which no one ever lived in, was designed to be photographed. It was all shades of white and beige, with art on the walls that my father, Thomas Calder, had bought not for its beauty, but for its appreciating value. The air always smelled of whatever polish the housekeeping staff used that week. It was a house built to be silent, a museum to our own success. My father was the chief curator. Thomas Calder was a man of quiet, crushing control. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His disapproval was a physical force, a drop in temperature in the room. To him, the world was a balance sheet. Land was an asset. Buildings were assets. Calder Ridge Developments was the culmination of his assets. And we, his family, were his most unpredictable, and therefore most disappointing, assets. He spoke little and decided everything, and the reputation of his company was always more important than the feelings of its occupants. After my mother died, when I was 8, that silence became a vacuum, and Vivian swept in to fill it. She was Vivian Vale back then, a local news anchor with a blindingly white smile and a voice that could make a traffic jam sound like an exciting opportunity. She was beautiful, ambitious, and she saw my father not as a man, but as an establishment. When she became Vivian Calder, she shed her old life like a snake skin. She was perfect at parties, perfect for the cameras, perfect on the charity boards. At home, she was a relentless, microscopic auditor. She checked my homework, not for understanding, but for neatness. She inspected the way I set the table, the way I folded my clothes. She was obsessed with the surface of things, and I, my mother's daughter, was a flaw in her perfect surface. I was the living, breathing evidence that she was not the first, not the only. I was a stain in her otherwise perfect family photograph. And then she had Chase. He was her validation, her heir. He was my father in miniature, but only in privilege, never in competence. Chase grew up marinated in entitlement, a boy who learned that his father's credit card was a magic wand that erased all consequences. He drove a new sports car at 16, skied in Vail every weekend, and viewed me not as a sister, but as a peculiar, silent piece of the household staff. I was the help who just happened to sit at the dinner table. I learned to live in that house like a tenant, not a resident. My shoes had to be lined up in the mudroom with a ruler's precision. My grades had to be perfect, not for my own future, but so Vivian could mention them at dinner parties. But the praise never came. When I was accepted into college, my father gave me a curt nod and said, "Good, an acceptable outcome." Vivian complained about the out-of-state tuition. Her parties were the worst. They were glittering. Loud affairs where hundreds of people I did not know would mill through our cold living room. Drinking my father's expensive wine, Vivian would glide through the crowd, a shark in couture, her hand resting on Chase's shoulder as she introduced him to developers and city council members. "This is my son, Chase," she would beam. "He's learning the business from the ground up." Then, a guest might spot me by the catering table. "And this must be your daughter." Vivian's smile would tighten, just for a second. "Oh, yes, this is Lena. She's a bit quiet, not really one for socializing." She would then steer the guest away, back toward the power, leaving me to fade back into the beige wallpaper. The moment that defined it all came in my senior year of college. I was presenting my final thesis, a deep dive into data anomalies in real estate trusts. I had worked on it for a year. I was proud of it. I sent an email to my father and Vivian 2 months in advance, inviting them. I attached a small, hopeful note. It would mean a lot to have you there. The day before, Vivian's assistant sent a reply. Mr. and Mrs. Calder send their regrets. They have a crucial networking gala with the Colorado Real Estate Board that evening and are unable to attend. I stood in the university lecture hall, under the buzzing fluorescent lights. The front row had name cards for family. The one labeled Calder sat in front of an empty, hollow plastic chair. I gave my presentation to that empty chair. I got a perfect grade. I never mentioned it to them, and they never asked. The only exception, the only crack of warmth in that cold, polished house, was my grandfather. Edward Calder was my father's father, but they were men cut from entirely different stone. Edward was a farmer, a man who had owned hundreds of acres of Colorado scrubland. He was the one who sold that land early, giving Thomas the seed money to start Calder Ridge Developments. He was a man of the earth, not the boardroom. While my father saw land as a number on a spreadsheet, my grandfather still saw it as dirt, as something you had to feel in your hands. He would visit the mansion and look uncomfortable in the white, sterile living room. He would find me in the library, or later, in my dorm room, surrounded by old computer parts I was taking apart. He would just sit, quietly, and watch me work with a soldering iron. He saw the patience in me. He saw the quiet, obsessive focus. He saw, I think, a different kind of strength. Vivian hated it. She despised our quiet connection. She was terrified that Edward, who still held a significant financial stake in the company, would get ideas. She feared he would favor the girl in his own will. So she began a quiet, relentless campaign. Whenever Edward was present, she would find ways to mention my failures. "Oh, Edward, I'm so worried about Lena," she would sigh, loud enough for me to hear from the next room. "She just has no drive. She stays in her room all the time. She's simply not ungrateful, just incapable. I worry she'll never be able to take care of herself if something happens to us." I learned that silence was my only shield. The less I said, the smaller a target I became. The more I faded into the background, the less energy Vivian spent trying to erase me. I became a ghost in my own home, a polite shadow that passed through hallways and took up as little space as possible. But ghosts see everything. They hear the whispers. They learn to read the room, to watch the subtle shifts in power. I was quiet, but I was not blind. I was watching, and I was, in my own way, keeping a tally. I remember one of those glittering parties. When I was 16, I was in my bedroom on the second floor, looking down at the backyard, which was lit up like a movie set, tents, fairy lights, a string quartet. Vivian was in the center of it all, laughing, her hand on my father's arm. I felt utterly invisible, a piece of furniture that had been accidentally left in an upstairs room. The door creaked open. It was my grandfather. He did not say anything about the party. He just stood beside me, looking down at the scene. "Don't believe everything they show off," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A big show is usually hiding a weak foundation." He looked at me, his eyes clear. "You're smart, Lena, but you're not like them. They like to talk. You like to watch." He tapped my textbook, a dry introductory accounting book, lying on my desk. "Learn to read the numbers," he said. "Numbers don't lie. People do." When it came time to choose a college, Vivian had already decorated my future. She wanted me in public relations. "You have a lovely classic face, Lena," she would say. "If you would only learn to smile, you could be a wonderful spokesperson for the Calder brand." My father disagreed. He wanted law. "Calder Ridge Developments always needs more lawyers," he'd stated, not as a suggestion, but as a staffing decision. We spend a fortune on outside counsel. I enrolled at Rockwell State University. It was a public school, gritty and sprawling, with concrete buildings from the 1970s and a budget that clearly did not extend to landscaping. The name itself seemed to offend Vivian. "Rockwell State?" she repeated, her voice tightening as if she'd tasted something sour. "It sounds like a community college. Can you even get a real degree there?" I had chosen forensic accounting and data analysis. My father was baffled. We were at one of our silent, mandatory Sunday dinners when I told him. He put his fork down with a heavy clink against the porcelain. "Forensic accounting?" he said, the words alien in his mouth. "That's dull, isn't it? That's a backroom job. The smart children go into law. Lena, the smart children run the company. Those dull numbers jobs are for anyone we can hire." "I find it interesting," I said. Vivian, ever the strategist, saw her opportunity. "Well, Thomas," she said, placing her hand over his, "if she insists on such a practical path, perhaps it's time she truly embraced the practicalities of life. She's an adult now. It's time for her to be independent." Independence was a euphemism for financial exile. The monthly allowance my mother's will had stipulated, which Vivian managed, was suddenly halved. Then it was quartered, choked off by administrative delays and new estate management fees. The checks from the family trust that were meant to cover tuition simply stopped arriving. "We're restructuring the portfolio," Vivian explained in a breezy email. Meanwhile, Chase, who was flunking his way through a private business degree at the University of Denver, received a brand new BMW 7 Series for his 21st birthday. I saw the invoice for it on my father's desk when I'd stopped by to pick up my mail. Chase had gone over the pre-approved budget by $12,000, adding custom rims and an absurd sound system. My father had paid it without a word. I needed a job. Not a summer internship at Calder Ridge where I'd be shuffling papers for Chase, but a real job. I found one on the edge of campus. It was a 24-hour print and photocopy shop called Copycats, wedged between a liquor store and a laundromat. The sign was a buzzing, pink and blue neon cat, but the K in cats flickered, and one of its ears was dark. The air inside was a mix of hot plastic, chemical toner, and the smell of the burnt, sludgy coffee that sat in a pot by the register. My shifts were the ones no one else wanted, midnight to 8 a.m. The city went quiet, but the machines never did. The graveyard shift was surprisingly busy. Law students, panicked and fueled by energy drinks, would come in at 3 a.m. with outlines to bind. Local accountants would drop off heavy, accordion file boxes of tax documents. Small business owners, weary and stained with the work of their day, would come in to print invoices or scan contracts. My job was to stand at the industrial-sized Xerox machines, feeding documents into the scanner, one after another, for hours. Flick, 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 the green bar of light would pass over the paper, and I would watch the digital image appear on the screen. At first, it was a blur of text, leases, invoices, deposition transcripts, stacks of receipts so high they had to be weighed. But after thousands of pages, fed into the machine in the silence of the early morning, my brain began to change. I stopped just scanning the pages. I started to read them. I saw a lease agreement for a new restaurant. On page 1, the rent was listed at $5,000. On the addendum, page 32, a utility and maintenance fee of another $2,000 was tacked on, hidden in dense legalese. I saw a signature on a partnership agreement that looked fine, but when the lawyer asked for a high-resolution scan, I zoomed in. The ink was a slightly different shade of black, and the pressure of the T was harder than on the other pages. It was a forgery, just a very good one. The numbers started to talk to me. I saw patterns. I saw an invoice for premium office supplies for $300, and another, all from the same vendor, all billed on the last Friday of the month. I saw invoices for winter heating oil billed to a construction company in the middle of July. I saw a vendor's address that was just a PEO box, and when I Googled it on the shop's slow computer, It was linked to a dozen other companies with no websites. The world Vivian and my father lived in was built on presentation. The world I was now living in was built on paper. And the paper was telling me that everyone was lying. In my fraud auditing class, taught by a sharp, unforgiving woman named Professor Anya Sharma, I found a name for my new skill. Professor Sharma was a retired auditor from one of the Big Four firms, and she treated her lecture hall like a hostile boardroom. She saw my final project, in which I had used publicly available data to cross-reference property deeds with newly registered LLCs in Colorado, flagging 3 companies that showed classic signs of being shell corporations for tax evasion. She called me to her office. It was a cramped space, piled high with binders and textbooks. She pushed my paper, marked with a bright red A, across the desk. "This," she said, tapping a flowchart I had drawn. "This pattern recognition here. You didn't just use the standard textbook formulas. You cross-referenced vendor registration dates with invoice timing. Most students never even think to do that. Where did you learn it?" "I work at a copy shop," I said. She stared at me for a long second, then laughed. A short, sharp bark. "Of course you do. You're seeing the raw data." She leaned forward. "I'm working on a research project funded by a grant. A consortium of community banks wants a better way to detect money laundering signatures in their transaction flows. It's dull, tedious data entry and analysis. It pays $12 an hour. Are you interested in being my research assistant?" I worked at Copycats from midnight to 8, slept for 4 hours, went to classes, and then worked for Professor Sharma until the labs closed. I lived on cheap coffee and the stale, day-old bagel Sal. My boss at Copycats would save for me. At the end of the semester, I took the paychecks from both jobs, cashed them, and walked to the bursar's office. The tuition for the semester was $4,250. I counted it out in 20s, 50s, and hundreds. The cash was limp and smelled faintly of toner in the coffee pot. The clerk, not even looking up, ran the bills through the counting machine and stamped my invoice. Paid in full. I stood outside the administration building, holding that flimsy piece of thermal paper. It was the first time in my life I had paid for something that truly mattered, with money that was entirely, completely my own. It felt like I had just spent months patiently, painstakingly sawing through a diamond collar. For the first time, I could breathe. The RA work was harder than any class. The data sets were massive. Millions of lines of transactions that crashed my old laptop. If the data is too big, you're using the wrong tools. Calder, Sharma told me, not unkindly. So, at the Copycats counter, in the dead hours around 3 a.m., I learned. I pulled up free tutorials and taught myself coding. I started with simple scripts in Python to clean the data. Then I learned how to write SQL queries to talk to the databases directly. I wrote small programs that would hunt for the anomalies I used to find by eye, the perfectly rounded numbers, the sequential invoice IDs from supposedly different vendors, the payments made just seconds before the close of business on a Friday. My father's world remained distant. My only contact was Grandpa Edward. He never called the landline at my apartment. He knew Vivian still monitored the family's phone records. Instead, he would send short, simple emails from an old, unsecured account, his grammar endearingly clumsy. "Need more books?" I would write back, "I'm fine. Grandpa, I just need time and data." He was the only one who understood. One night at Copycats, or maybe it was morning, around 4 a.m., a man named Miguel came in. He owned a small auto body shop a few blocks away. He was covered in grease, and his eyes were red with exhaustion. He dropped a heavy accounting ledger on the counter, along with a shoebox full of receipts. "I need all this scanned," he said, his voice rough. "My partner handles the books. He keeps telling me we're barely breaking even, that we need to sell the shop. But I look around, and the shop is always full. We're booked for 6 weeks. It doesn't add up. He's making me feel crazy." I looked at him. I saw a man being gaslit by a balance sheet. "I'll scan them," I said. And I did. But I also looked. I saw the patterns. I saw invoices for expensive, specialized parts for Mercedes and BMWs. But I knew Miguel's shop only serviced American trucks. I saw checks written to cash for shop supplies in amounts that were always just under $500, the threshold that would require a second signature. I saw escalating payments to a new tire vendor I'd never seen him use before. On a hunch, I ran the new vendor's name through the Colorado Secretary of State's public database on my laptop. It wasn't a tire company, it was an LLC, registered just 3 months ago. The registered agent was the partner's wife. He wasn't just stealing, he was systematically bleeding the company dry with a shell company, faking losses to force Miguel to sell his half for pennies on the dollar. I spent the rest of my shift sorting the evidence. I scanned all his documents as requested, but I also printed out the LLC registration, the list of invoices from the shell company, and a simple summary of the shop supplies checks. I put them in a separate, smaller folder. When Miguel came back at 7 a.m., I handed him the scans, then I handed him the folder. "You're paying me to scan," I said. "So this part is free. I think you should show these specific invoices and this registration to a lawyer. You're not crazy." He opened the folder and stared at the pages. He looked at me, his eyes filling with a new, cold clarity. He tried to pay me extra, but I refused. He told his lawyer, impressed, told another small business owner. A week later, the owner of a local bakery came in. Confused about her food costs, I looked at her books and found her main flour supplier was systematically double billing her. Then a small construction firm came, wondering why they never had cash on hand. I found an employee who had set up a ghost payroll for a dozen non-existent workers. I started taking on small freelance jobs. They paid me in cash, a few $100s here, 1,000 there, to look at the numbers. The money was good. It paid for my rent and my tuition, but it was the click that I lived for. The moment the puzzle snapped into place, the moment the lie was exposed, the moment the data told the truth. Every time I found one, I felt my spine get a little straighter. When I finished my research project for Professor Sharma, she had me write the final analysis report for the bank consortium. It was 50 pages long, dense with charts, data tables, and my conclusions on identifying high-risk patterns. I printed a single copy for myself at Copycats. I used the good, 32-pound linen paper that we charged 80 cents a sheet for. I bound it with a clear cover and a black spine. The cover page was simple, stark, and beautiful. Analysis of anomalous transaction patterns in community banking. Prepared by Lena Calder. I took it back to my tiny, one-room apartment above a pizza shop. The walls were thin, and the air always smelled faintly of garlic and oregano. I took down a cheap, framed print of sunflowers that had come with the unit. I took my report, my name on the cover, and I taped it to the wall. It was my diploma. It was my first major professional victory. It was a new last will and testament, one that I was writing for myself, line by line. From that moment on, I decided I would live by what I could see, what I could prove, and what I could find in the numbers. I would never, ever again live by what they told me to believe. The freelance work and my studies built a wall around me, a new identity brick by brick. I was no longer just the Calder daughter. I was a forensic analyst, a data consultant, a person people paid for the truth. But I had not yet turned that lens on my own family. I was afraid of what I would find. That changed on a raw, windy Sunday in October. I drove out to my grandfather's house. He had refused to move into the Cherry Creek mansion with my father, and he had refused to move into the sterile, high-end retirement community Vivian kept pushing on him. He lived in the original farmhouse on a small, 10-acre parcel of land that he had stubbornly kept when he sold the rest of the ranch to my father decades ago. It was a simple, white, 2-story house with a porch, a place that smelled of old wood, coffee, and earth. I found him not on the porch, but in his small, cluttered office, a room piled high with farming almanacs and dusty ledgers from the 1960s. He was hunched over a stack of pristine, laser-printed documents, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked small and tired.
"Lena," he said, relief in his voice. "I'm glad you're here. I can't make heads or tails of this."
He pushed a stack of papers across the desk. They were thick, heavy bond, and they bore the crisp, embossed logo of Calder Ridge Developments. "It's from your father's office," he said. "Vivian says it's just a portfolio update on my old investment, a restructuring. But the numbers, they don't look like an investment anymore. They look like a bill." I sat down. My hands were steady as I picked up the first page. It was a new loan agreement, a mortgage, to be precise, against this house, against his last 10 acres. I scanned the first page. The principal amount was shocking, far more than the land was currently worth. But his signature was there, at the bottom, a shaky, uncertain version of his once strong hand. "When did you sign this, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice very quiet. "Oh, about 6 months ago," he said, waving a hand vaguely. "Vivian and Thomas had me in for a meeting. They said it was just to unlock the equity in my original shares, to protect my assets. They said it was just paperwork. I signed where they told me to." I kept reading. My blood, which had been warm from the drive, began to turn to ice. It wasn't just a loan. It was a variable rate, balloon payment mortgage. The interest rate was a predatory 12%, set to adjust after only 1 year. But it was the covenants, the penalty clauses, that made my breath catch. If a payment was late by more than 10 days, a late penalty of $10,000 was applied. If a payment was late by more than 30 days, the entire loan amount became due immediately. It was a trap. It was a financial instrument designed not to be repaid, but to be defaulted on. It was structured to guarantee that my grandfather, living on a fixed income, would fail. And when he did, he would lose his home, his last piece of the earth. "I'm going to scan these, Grandpa," I said. My voice was flat, professional, the voice I used at Copycats. "I need to take these back to my apartment." He just nodded, looking lost. "Whatever you say, child. Just tell me what it means." I did not sleep that night, in my small apartment, with the smell of garlic from the pizza shop below wafting in. I laid all 40 pages out on my floor. I scanned each one into a high-resolution PDF, and then I went to work. I used the same skills I had honed for Professor Sharma and for Miguel's auto shop. I cross-referenced every line item. I saw the loan origination fees, which were normal, but then I saw something else. A recurring quarterly fee, $25,000. It was labeled Strategic Risk Management and Advisory Fee. $25,000 every 3 months, being added to his loan principal, effectively eating away at any equity he had. It was an anchor designed to sink him faster. The fee was being paid out not to Calder Ridge Developments, but to a third-party consultant, VMC Holdings, LLC. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I turned to the state's public business database, the same one I had used for Miguel. I typed in VMC Holdings, LLC. The company had been registered 18 months ago. Its line of business was listed as professional and financial consulting. Its address was a UPS store post office box in Cherry Creek, just 3 blocks from the Calder mansion. And the registered agents, the incorporators, the sole shareholders, were listed as Vivian M. Calder and Chase T. Calder. I sat back on my heels, the floor cold beneath me. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to close my eyes. This was not a stranger's invoice. This was not a crooked partner in an auto shop. This was my family. Vivian and Chase had created a shell company. They were charging my grandfather $100,000 a year for advisory services he was not receiving, billing it to a predatory loan they had tricked him into signing, all so they could drain his assets, force him into default, and seize his last piece of land. The deeper I dug, the dirtier it became. I spent the next 2 weeks in a fever. I barely ate. I lived on public records, annual reports, and property filings. I pulled every public document related to Calder Ridge developments from the last 5 years. These were dry, boring SEC filings, corporate registrations, and quarterly reports. the very documents my father and Vivian assumed no one, least of all me, would ever bother to read. I used my data analysis skills to link them. I saw how Vivian had been appointed to the board of Calder Ridge, then to its financial oversight committee. I saw how she had systematically moved my father's original investment from my grandfather, which was a simple, profitable share in the company, and converted it into this new, complex debt instrument, claiming it was for tax efficiency. I saw the plan. It was simple, elegant, and sociopathic. Step 1. Convince Thomas that his father's old-fashioned shares were a liability. Step 2. Help Edward by restructuring those shares into a debt he could not understand. Step 3. Use their shell company, VMC Holdings, to bleed that debt dry with phantom fees. Step 4. When Edward defaulted, Vivian and Chase, through VMC, would buy the defaulted loan from Calder Ridge for pennies on the dollar. Step 5. They would foreclose on my grandfather, take his land, and sell it to developers for a massive profit that would belong entirely to them, not to Calder Ridge, and not to my father. They were robbing him. They were robbing him in broad daylight, using my father's own company as the weapon. I felt a cold, clean rage, a fury so pure it was almost calming. This was not the chaotic, emotional anger of Vivian's insults. This was the cold, hard certainty of a balance sheet that did not add up. They were hurting the one person in my life who had ever shown me uncomplicated kindness. I had to try, one last time, to go through the proper channels. I scheduled a brief, 15-minute meeting with my father at his office, under the guise of discussing my future plans. He sat behind his massive desk, the skyline of Denver at his back, looking impatient. I did not show him the evidence. I knew better. I approached it indirectly. "I was visiting Grandpa last weekend," I said. "He seems confused about his finances, about the new mortgage on the farmhouse. He seems to think he's in some kind of trouble." My father sighed, a sound of deep, weary irritation. He steepled his fingers. "Lena, I pay you an allowance so you don't have to worry about these things. Your grandfather is an old man. He's not as sharp as he used to be with money. He gets confused. The terms on that loan look very aggressive." I pushed, my voice level. "I'm not sure he understands what he signed." "Vivian is handling it," he said, his voice final. It was the sound of a door shutting. "She has a brilliant head for managing the family assets. She's protecting him. Now, if that's all, I have a call with our investors in exactly 2 minutes." He dismissed me. He dismissed my concern, and he dismissed his own father, all in one breath. He had given her the keys to the kingdom, and he refused to believe she would do anything but polish the silver. I walked out of that office, and I knew I was alone in this. My father was not an ally. He was an obstacle, a man blinded by the perfect performance of his devoted wife. That night, I bought a new, external solid-state hard drive. I spent hours at my terminal, partitioning it, formatting it, and building an encryption wall so strong it would take the NSA a decade to crack. I began to copy everything: the scans of my grandfather's loan, the VMC Holdings registration, the bank transfers I'd managed to trace through public property records, the annual reports, the emails. I compiled it all into a single, terrifying file. I created a new folder on the encrypted drive. I stared at the blinking cursor, thinking of the rot at the heart of my family. The rot that started with money and power and metastasized into this. I named the folder Root Cause. A few days later, I drove back to the farmhouse. I sat with my grandfather at his kitchen table. I did not show him the spreadsheets. I did not use words like LLC or covenants or foreclosure. I told it to him as a story. "Grandpa," I said, "do you remember that partner at the auto shop? The one who was stealing from his friend?" He nodded. "I do. A snake in the grass." "Vivian and Chase are doing the same thing to you," I said. "They made you sign a bad loan. They are using a secret company to send you fake bills. They are trying to take this house." He was silent. He stared out the window. at the big oak tree he'd planted with my grandmother 50 years ago. He did not look shocked. He did not look surprised. He just looked sad. And then he looked angry. He was quiet for a very long time. So long I thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally turned to look at me, his eyes were not the cloudy, confused eyes of the old man in the office. They were sharp. They were the eyes of the man who had built a farm from nothing, who had survived dust bowls and recessions. "If I want to fix this," he asked, his voice a low rumble, "if I want to stop them, will you dare to walk with me?" "I will," I said. There was no hesitation. This was not about inheritance. It was not about the Calder name. It was about this man, this house, and the simple, brutal fact of right and wrong. "Good," he said, "because I don't just want to fix it. I want to make sure they can never hurt anyone this way again." I went home and opened a new file on my computer. I began to write. It was not a student paper. It was a professional, independent forensic audit. I was no longer just a ghost in the Calder mansion. I was the auditor, and I was about to dissect the entire Calder empire, piece by piece, number by number. The next weekend, I brought him the first draft. It was 30 pages long, bound in a simple black cover. It detailed every transaction, every date, every signature, and every lie. He read it from beginning to end, his lips moving silently. When he was done, he nodded once. He stood up, walked to the old, cast-iron safe hidden behind a painting of a wheat field, and spun the combination dial. He placed my report inside, next to his will and the deed to his house. He closed the heavy door. The thud and click of the tumblers falling into place was a sound of absolute finality. The decision had been made. The work I did for my grandfather was a key, but it also opened a door. In digging through the Calder Ridge files and VMC holdings, I saw the method. Vivian and Chase weren't financial geniuses. They were just sloppy, arrogant, and operating in a space where they assumed no one was looking. They were too small to attract the attention of a major auditing firm like Deloitte or Ernst & Young, and too big for a Main Street accountant to catch. I realized there was a massive, gaping hole in the market. My father's world, the world of Calder Ridge, could afford the Big Four auditing firms. They could pay $500,000 for a 6-month-long investigation into a potential acquisition. But what about the smaller players? The mid-level private equity funds? The family offices managing a few $100 million? They were terrified of being defrauded, of exactly what Vivian was doing to my grandfather, but they couldn't afford a $10,000 a month retainer just for peace of mind. They were the perfect clients. I took the scripts I had written, the ones that automated the cross-referencing of public databases, and I started to build. I spent my nights and weekends coding, refining, and testing. I created a simple, powerful dashboard that could ingest massive data sets, bank transactions, vendor lists, corporate filings, and automatically flag the anomalies I used to hunt for by hand. It looked for shell companies, for phantom vendors, for mismatched addresses, for invoice numbers that were too sequential, for payments made at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I named it TraceLinks Analytics. It wasn't just software, it was a service. The software found the smoke, and I provided the analysis that located the fire. I showed the beta version to Professor Sharma. She reviewed the code, the output, and the reports I had generated for my small-time freelance clients. She was, for the first time, visibly impressed. "This is not a student project, Calder," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "This is a commercial product. The big firms are trying to build this, but they're too slow, too bureaucratic. You built it in your apartment." She picked up her phone. "I have a former student," she said, dialing. "He's a managing partner at a mid-sized capital group, Northline Capital. They're smart, aggressive, and I know for a fact they got burned last year on a bad real estate deal in Utah. They're hungry, and they're paranoid. That's the perfect combination. I'm introducing you." The meeting was held in a standard, boring boardroom, not the opulent theater of Harrington and Wells, just a room with a whiteboard and a view of a parking garage. I was 24 years old. I was presenting to 4 men in their late 40s, all of whom looked skeptical and tired. So, Professor Sharma says you're a data prodigy. The partner, a man named Ben, said, not unkindly, she says you find things. What does that mean? It means people lie with numbers, I said. TraceLinks finds the patterns in those lies. Give me a portfolio you're looking at. Give me one you already own. I'll run the data. If it's clean, I'll tell you it's clean. If it's not, I'll show you exactly where the rot is. They were unconvinced. They saw a kid. Finally. Ben sighed. Look, we have a small investment in a logistics company out of Ohio. It looks clean on paper, impeccable financials. But our gut says something is off. We're about to double our position. A $20 million buy-in. We'll give you a shot. We'll pay your consulting fee. Show us what you've got. They gave me access to their data room. It was 3 years of financial statements, vendor lists, and bank transactions. I took it home. I fed it into the TraceLinks engine. The first pass came back clean. The numbers all matched. The statements were audited by a respectable mid-level firm, but my system flagged something the human auditors had missed. It was a pattern, almost invisible. The logistics company had over 300 vendors, but 10 of those vendors, who supplied specialized packing materials, were all registered in different states, one in Delaware, one in Wyoming, one in Nevada. Standard stuff, for tax reasons. But TraceLinks did what the human auditors didn't. It cross-referenced the registration dates. All 10 companies had been registered in the same 48-hour period 2 years prior. It then flagged the addresses. They were all different P.O. boxes. But it cross-referenced the metadata from the scanned invoices in the data room. The invoices had all been created using the exact same software template, on the same version of the program. And then, the final piece, the bank transactions. The payments to these 10 companies were all routed to 10 different bank accounts. But those 10 accounts, at 3 different banks, were all making regularly scheduled, identical management fee payments to a single, 11th company. A company registered in South Dakota to the CFO's brother-in-law. The Ohio company wasn't just clean, it was a sophisticated multi-state skimming operation. The CFO was siphoning off nearly 15% of their gross revenue, millions of dollars, through a network of phantom shell companies. The company was a hollowed-out husk. I prepared my report. It was 10 pages, no emotion, just the data, the links, the flowchart showing the flow of money, and the public registrations. I presented it to Ben and his partners the next day. They were silent. Ben, pale, left the room to make a phone call. He came back 10 minutes later. Our internal team just verified it, he said, his voice shaky. The bank confirmed the automated transfers. We were about to wire $20 million into a burning building. You just saved us. Not just the $20 million, but the $10 million we already had in. He looked at me, his skepticism gone, replaced by a kind of awe. What do you want? A contract, I said. Not a one-time fee, a monthly retainer. You give TraceLinks full access to your due diligence data room on every potential deal. We'll be your in-house forensic team, for a fraction of the cost of the Big Four. Name your price, he said. We negotiated. I held my ground. I knew what I had, and I knew what it was worth. They didn't even blink. The first contract was for $1.2 million a year, paid in quarterly installments. The first wire transfer, for $300,000, hit my new business checking account 72 hours later. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans, all of them, in a single, glorious online payment. The second thing I did was sign a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet, anonymous building in a neighborhood Vivian would never, ever visit. The third thing I did was hire the second-best data engineer from Rockwell State's program, a quiet genius named Samir, and offered him a salary that was 30% higher than the one he'd been offered at a major tech firm. I told him he could work from home. I registered my company. I did not use the name Calder. I did not want the association, the questions, or the attention. I filed the paperwork in Delaware under the name TraceLinks Solutions, LLC. My office, was a $500 a month desk in a generic co-working space, purely for the mail service. To my family, I was invisible. I still attended the mandatory Sunday dinners, listening to Chase brag about a golf game or Vivian complain about a caterer. "How is your little job, Lena?" Vivian asked me one Sunday, patting my hand with a pitying smile. "Are you managing? I do hope you're saving. It's so important for a girl in your position to have a little nest egg." "I'm managing, thank you, Vivian," I said, thinking of the six-figure balance in my business account. "The numbers are very interesting." "That's nice, dear," she said, and turned back to Chase. They had no idea. I was the quiet, slow daughter, the one who wasn't good with people, the one who was doing some dull numbers job for a mediocre salary. I was their permanent, harmless charity case, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The invitations started to arrive, not to the house, but to my corporate email. An invitation to speak on a panel at a fintech conference in Austin, an email from a reporter at a niche, high-level financial journal asking for my take on new wave due diligence. I was becoming a name, but only in a world they would never see, a world they didn't even know existed. I printed one copy of the Northline Capital contract. I drove to the farmhouse. Grandpa Edward was on the porch, reading an almanac. I didn't say anything. I just handed him the folder. He read it slowly. He read the scope of work. He read the signatures. He looked at the final page, at the fee schedule. He looked at the number, $1,200,000. His hands, the hands that had been so shaky and confused over Vivian's loan documents, were trembling, but this time for a different reason. He folded the contract, very carefully, and handed it back to me. He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at me, and his eyes were bright. "The là ít nhất có một người trong nhà này biết dùng số liệu để giúp người khác," he said, his voice thick. "So, at least one person in this family knows how to use numbers to help people, not to strangle them." That night, I opened one more bank account, a private, separate trust, funded with an initial deposit of $100,000 from my first payment. I set up an automatic transfer, directing 20% of all my future income into it. This was not my salary. This was not my company's operating capital. This was the war chest. This was the fund I would use for the legal battle I knew was coming, the battle for my grandfather's house, the battle for my father's company, the battle for root cause. I sat at the small, cheap desk in my new, empty apartment. The Northline contract was spread out before me. I picked up a pen to sign my copy. It was an old, black, heavy fountain pen. My grandfather had given it to me when I'd first left for college. Vivian had said it was pretentious and impractical. I uncapped it. The nib was smooth. I signed my name, Lena Calder. It was not the shaky, terrified signature of a girl being forced to sign a document she didn't understand. It was the firm, clear signature of a founder. It was a signature that held the weight of data, of proof, and of power. It was the first time I realized that a signature could be an act of creation, not just an act of surrender. The call came not to my apartment, but to Vivian. My father had collapsed during a keynote speech at an investors' conference in Colorado Springs. A massive, widow-making heart attack. He survived the ambulance ride. He survived the emergency surgery, a grueling quadruple bypass, but he was not recovering. He was in the cardiac intensive care unit, a man suddenly made fragile, tethered to a dozen whining, beeping machines. The doctors, grave men with tight mouths, warned Vivian to prepare for all contingencies. My father, Thomas Calder, the man who moved mountains and markets, was dying. Vivian, in a performance of grief that was both breathtaking and terrifying, moved with astonishing speed. She was no longer just the wife. She was the regent. Within hours, she had placed the entire corporation, Calder Ridge Developments, under her interim leadership. Her emails, full of sharp commands and legal jargon, began flying before my father's blood pressure had even stabilized. She applied the same lockdown to the hospital. When I arrived at the CICU, I was met not by a nurse, but by a private security guard in a black suit, the kind my father used for shareholder meetings. He had a clipboard. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice flat, not even looking at me. "Immediate family only." "I am his daughter," I said, my voice sounding strange in the antiseptic quiet. He looked down his list. "My instructions are for Mrs. Vivian Calder and Mr. Chase Calder only, no other visitors." "That's a mistake. I'm Lena Calder." "My instructions are clear," he repeated. Through the wired glass of the CICU doors, I could see her, Vivian, dressed in a flawless, somber navy suit, was on her phone, pacing, already running the empire. Chase was slumped in a chair, staring at his shoes. She was not protecting him. She was isolating him. She was ensuring that in his final, weakest moments, the only voice he heard, the only reality he knew, was the one she was creating for him. I was not a daughter coming to grieve. I was a security risk. I was an agitation the doctors had been warned about. I was locked out. I called my grandfather. He was silent on the phone for a full minute, and I thought the connection had dropped. "She is keeping me from my son," he finally said. His voice was not the frail rasp of an old man. It was a low, cold rumble of thunder. "Get your laptop. Lena, get the black binder you made for me. Pick me up. We are going to the hospital." When we arrived, the same guard stood up as we approached. "Sir, ma'am, I told you." My grandfather did not stop walking. He was 90 years old, frail and bent, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, but he did not slow down. He walked directly at the guard, forcing the younger, larger man to take a step back. "I am Edward Calder," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "That is my son, Thomas. In that room, you have exactly 10 seconds to move, or I'm going to call the city desk at the Denver Post and tell them that Thomas Calder's devoted wife is using armed guards to bar his dying father from his bedside. I promise you, that will make the front page tomorrow." The guard, a man paid for his muscle, not his judgment, floundered. He looked panicked. The CACU door hissed open, and Vivian emerged, her face a mask of strained, compassionate concern. "Edward, thank goodness you're here. But this is a terrible time. The doctors, he's just so weak. They don't want him agitated." "Then you should leave," my grandfather said, not even looking at her. "Get out of my way, Vivian." She was trapped. The one thing she could not control was the optics of this. Denying a father his last moments with his son was a sin even her social circle could not forgive. She forced a tight, brittle smile. Of course you can see him. Just be quick. He needs his rest." She stepped aside, then her eyes fixed on me. "But she waits here. The doctors were very specific. Too much stimulation." "She comes with me," my grandfather said, his grip tightening on his cane. "I am an old man. She is my assistant. I do not understand these new medical things. She comes with me to take notes." "An assistant?" Vivian sneered, her mask slipping. "Yes, and she comes with me now," he said, and he pushed past her. Vivian's face was a storm of fury, but she was trapped by her own performance. She could not cause a scene. She could not stop us. The door to room 3 hissed shut behind us, sealing us in. The sound of the beeping monitors was deafening. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was a landscape of tubes and wires, his skin the color of ash. His eyes closed. "Thomas," my grandfather said, his voice suddenly gentle. My father's eyes flickered open. They were cloudy with pain and medication. He tried to focus. "Dad?" he whispered. The word was a dry rasp. You came." "I'm here, son," Edward said, pulling a plastic chair close to the bed, the legs scraping on the linoleum. "Dad, I think I'm—" "Don't," my grandfather said, holding up a hand. "Don't waste your breath on that. We don't have time. We have to talk about your wife." A small, electrical spark of the old Thomas returned. "Vivian," he rasped, She's wonderful. She's handling everything. She is handling everything, my grandfather agreed, his voice hardening. She's been handling it for years. She's been robbing you, and she's been robbing me. What? No, my father said, trying to shake his head, a gesture of anger that was just a weak wobble on the pillow. You're old, confused. She protects. She protects herself, Edward said. He turned to me. Lena, show him. This was it. My hands were perfectly steady. I stepped forward. I did not open my laptop. Not yet. I opened the black binder. The simple, physical report I had printed. I placed it on the adjustable bed table, over his chest. What is this? He whispered. It's a company, Dad, I said. A company called VMC Holdings, LLC. I laid the first page on top. The Colorado Secretary of State filing. It's a shell company, I said, my voice as flat and clinical as if I were presenting to Northline Capital. It was incorporated 18 months ago. The principals are Vivian Calder and Chase Calder. My father stared at the paper, his breathing hitched. No, that's a consultant, a firm we use. It's their firm, I said. I flipped the page. Here is the loan document they had Grandpa sign, the one that puts his farmhouse up as collateral. And here, I pointed, is the quarterly advisory fee of $25,000 paid from that loan, directly to VMC Holdings. She wouldn't, he breathed. But the denial was weak, hollow. She would, I said, and she did. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. I didn't show him the complex spreadsheets. I showed him the flowchart, the simple, brutal diagram of the theft, a box labeled Calder Ridge with an arrow to a box labeled Grandpa's Loan, an arrow from that to VMC Holdings, and from that, arrows splitting the money, one to Chase's Land Rover payments and one to Vivian's Amex account. I traced the money. Dad, I said, she's been siphoning it for almost 2 years. She's been stealing from Grandpa, and she's been using your company as the bank. It's all here. The bank records, the signatures, the wire transfers, it's all right here. He stared at the screen. The man who lived by the numbers was now being executed by them. The color drained from his face, leaving a gray, waxy sheen. The monitor above his bed let out a long, high-pitched beep as his heart rate skyrocketed. A frantic, terrified protest. Then it settled into a dangerously fast, shallow rhythm. He had survived the heart attack, but this betrayal, was the second, fatal blow. He had built his entire world on control, on assets he could manage, and he finally, clearly understood that his most valuable, most trusted asset was a saboteur. He choked, a tear of pure agonizing rage leaking from the corner of his eye. She did this. It was not a question, it was a judgment. My grandfather put his calloused hand over my father's. Yes, son, she did, and when you are gone, she will finish the job. She will take my house, and she will throw this girl. He nodded at me. Out onto the street with nothing. She will burn your legacy to the ground to keep herself warm, unless you fix it. How? My father whispered. He was broken. The will. My will. It all goes to her. It's too late. She'll contest. Say I'm not of sound mind. She will, I said, the words coming to me in a cold, sudden rush of clarity. She will fight, and she'll win, if she knows there's a fight, so we don't let her know. They both looked at me, my father's eyes, clouded with morphine and defeat, sharpened. We don't change the will, I said, leaning in. We let her have it. We let her read it. We let her believe she has won everything. Then what's the point? Grandpa asked. We add a page, I said, a supplement, an addendum, a single page, with a single secret condition, a trap that only her behavior can spring. My father understood. In that moment, The fog of his medication cleared, and he saw the cold, brutal strategy. He saw himself in me. Her arrogance, he whispered. Her temper, I said. She hates me, and when she thinks she has all the power, she will be cruel. She won't be able to resist. We use her own victory against her. We make her the author of her own destruction. My father's hand fumbled for the nurse's call button. He pressed it, hard. A nurse hurried in. Mr. Calder, your heart rate. Get Harrington, my father rasped, a surge of his old, terrifying authority returning. Get my lawyer, Harrington and Wells. Tell him it's a deathbed declaration. Tell him to get here now. Harrington, the family lawyer, arrived in a panicked rush 45 minutes later. He was pale, his suit rumpled. Vivian was right behind him, furious. Thomas, darling, what is this? What are you doing? You're supposed to be resting. Out, my father commanded, his voice a shocking bark. All of you, just me, my father, Lena, and Harrington. The door was locked. Thomas, Harrington stammered, this is highly irregular. Any document signed now. Your condition and... Shut up, Howard, and write, my father ordered. I am of sound mind, and you know it. You will write exactly what I say. This is an addendum to my last will and testament. My grandfather spoke. A conditional addendum, to be attached to the primary will, but to remain sealed. It is to be opened and read only if a specific condition is met. Harrington's pen hovered. And the condition, Thomas? My father's eyes found mine. They were not warm. It was too late for that. They were filled with a profound, chilling regret. A regret not for the love he hadn't given, but for the strategic error he had made. The condition, my father whispered, but his voice was clear. Is this, if, during the official reading of my will, my wife, Vivian Calder, or my son, Chase Calder, commits any act of physical violence or extreme, deliberate public humiliation against my daughter, Lena Calder, then all bequeathments, all properties, and all shares designated for that person are immediately and irrevocably voided. Harrington's hand froze. Thomas, that's a landmine. It's unenforceable. It is my will, my father said. Write it. And if voided? Harrington asked, his voice shaking. The assets, where do they go? To a new entity, my grandfather said, standing tall. The Calder Edward Trust. All voided assets will be transferred to this trust. The trustees and sole beneficiaries will be myself, Edward Calder, and my granddaughter, Lena Calder. Harrington wrote. His hand flew across the paper. It was a simple, brilliant, and vicious legal trap. He printed it from a small, portable printer in his briefcase. He had the head nurse and another doctor come in to witness the signature. My father's hand, skeletal and blue with IV lines, was shaking violently. He could barely hold the pen. I watched him, this man who had built an empire with that hand, as he dragged it across the bottom of the page. His signature was a jagged, angry final line. It was done. Harrington, his face ashen, sealed the single page into a thick manila envelope and had my father sign across the seal. He placed it in his briefcase. Thomas, Go, my father whispered. They all left. The nurse, the doctor, Harrington, my grandfather. The door clicked shut, leaving just me and him. The room was quiet again, just the beeping of the monitors. He was exhausted. The effort, that final act of strategic war, had taken the last of his strength. His breathing was shallow. His eyes found mine. He fumbled for my hand, and I let him take it. His skin was cold. You're like me, he breathed. Smart, colder than I knew. I said nothing. What was there to say? I should have protected, he stammered. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. a confession that he had mismanaged his most important asset. His grip tightened, a final, spastic clutch of his fingers. Then his eyes closed, and his hand went slack. He fell into a sleep. The rhythm on the monitor grew erratic, then long, then flat. He never woke up. By the time the alarms brought Vivian and the nurses running back into the room, he was already gone. The funeral of Thomas Calder was a masterpiece of public relations. Vivian, a true professional, had arranged it all. It was held at the city's oldest and most imposing cathedral, the one reserved for senators and old-money patriarchs. The pews were filled with a who's who of Colorado business and politics. The governor was there. The press, which Vivian had carefully invited, was kept at a respectful distance, their long focus lenses capturing every perfect, tragic detail. Vivian herself was the star, dressed in a custom-made black wool dress that was the pinnacle of quiet, devastating elegance. She wore a veil, but it was sheer enough for the cameras to capture the single, noble tear that rolled down her cheek at the precise moment the eulogy began. It was a flawless performance. I was not on the program. I was not seated in the front row with the family. Vivian had assigned me to the narthex, the entryway of the church, to help greet the guests and hand out the glossy, embossed memorial programs. I was staff, a polite, somber usher in a simple black dress, the one I had worn to my father's hospital bed. Chase, as the son and heir, delivered the eulogy. He stood at the marble lectern, his new suit straining slightly at the shoulders, and read, in a voice thick with forced, unconvincing emotion, a speech that was a string of empty platitudes. He spoke of my father's legacy, the big shoes I have to fill, and my responsibility as the man of the family now. He was not memorializing his father. He was auditioning for his father's chair. After the burial, we returned to the mansion in Cherry Creek. Vivian had announced a quiet memorial gathering for close friends. It was a party. The house was filled with flowers, but the atmosphere was not one of mourning. It was one of transition. The catering was exquisite, the champagne flowed, and the low murmur of conversation was not about grief, it was about business. It was Vivian's coronation. She had changed into a simple, elegant black silk lounge suit and held court in the center of the cold, white living room. She was surrounded by my father's partners, by bankers, by the very people Chase had given his hollow speech to. Thomas always wanted the company to be forward-thinking, I heard her say, her voice smooth and confident. He was brilliant, but he was sentimental about some of the older assets. It's time to streamline, to be more aggressive. A partner from a development firm, a man with a predatory smile, nodded. The world is changing. Vivian, you need to be nimble. Exactly, she said, her smile bright. Take his father's old farm. For instance, all that land, just sitting there. Edward is, well, he's not in a position to manage it, and it's a drain on the estate. It's time to liquidate. Fold that capital back into something modern, something with a real return. Liquidate. She spoke of my grandfather's home, his last piece of the earth, as if it were a bad stock. She spoke of him as if he were a line item, a gnat to be swatted away. I moved through the rooms, a ghost in my own right. I had a tray of empty glasses in my hand, a perfect prop. No one notices the help. As I passed my father's study, the door was ajar. Vivian's new executive assistant, a young, sharp-eyed woman I didn't recognize, had left a stack of files on the desk, not my father's, but Vivian's. On top was a folder labeled, New Leverage Proposals, Urgent. Later, I heard Vivian's voice, sharp and annoyed, coming from the library. She was on a call. The door left open. Her confidence so total, she didn't bother with privacy. No, I told him. The projections are solid. She snapped into her phone. We use the existing assets as collateral. A bridge loan, we can get $50 million, easy. The Aspen Apex project is a gold mine. But we have to move now, before the will is even finalized. By the time the lawyers are done, I want the ink to be dry on the new financing." I froze, leveraging the existing assets. She was planning to take out massive, new, high-risk loans against my father's estate before she legally even owned it. She was treating the entire legacy of Calder Ridge as her personal gambling chip. If this Aspen Apex project, whatever it was, failed, she wouldn't just lose her share. She would bankrupt the entire estate. She would take it all down, including the minor assets, like my grandfather's home and my own pitiful, insulting allowance. She was not a manager. She was a scavenger, and she was in a hurry to pick the bones clean. That night, after the last of the mourners had left, I went back to my own apartment. I sat at my desk, the glow of my 3 monitors illuminating the room. I was no longer Lena Calder, the quiet daughter. I was the founder of Tracelinks. I went to work. I used my access to professional databases, the ones that cost thousands of dollars a month, the ones Vivian didn't even know existed. I ran a new, deep-dive credit and asset report on Calder Ridge developments. I ran one on my father's personal holdings. I ran one on Vivian and one on Chase. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The root cause folder on my encrypted drive, which already held the proof of their fraud against my grandfather, was suddenly incomplete. This was a new, more desperate chapter. Vivian and Chase were in debt. Serious debt. Chase had over $200,000 in gambling losses from a marker in Vegas. Vivian had a string of failed, private consulting ventures under her maiden name, all of which had gone bust. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. The Aspen Apex project wasn't just an opportunity. It was a bailout, a way to use my father's money to pay off their secret, personal failures. They weren't just trying to seize power. They were trying to plug a massive hole in their own finances before the rest of the world found out. Everywhere I looked, I found more. I cross-referenced the Aspen Apex Holding Company. It was another shell, just like VMC Holdings. And the primary partner in that shell? The same developer I had seen her talking to at the party, a man who had been sued twice in Utah for defrauding investors. I saved everything, every new report, every credit filing, every link, every public record. I added it all to the root cause folder. The binder I had printed for my grandfather was now just an introduction. The full report was over 200 pages. I saw Vivian a few days later, at the mansion. She was supervising the housekeepers, pointing out a piece of art she wanted moved. "Oh, Lena," she said, barely looking at me. "You're still here? I thought you'd be back at your little job." "I'm just checking on Grandpa's mail," I said. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about all this, dear. It's all very complicated. Mortgages, assets, leveraging. It's a world you simply wouldn't understand. What do you know about real money, after all?" I just nodded. "You're right, Vivian, it's very complicated." And in my bag, my laptop held a file that could send her to prison. I just smiled, and added the memory of her dismissive, arrogant face to my mental file. My real concern was my grandfather. He was fading. The shock of my father's death had hit him hard. He was weaker, more confused, and Vivian was circling. "He's not safe in that old house, Lena," she told me, her voice dripping with false concern. "He could fall. He's clearly becoming senile. I found a wonderful place for him, the best, Sunrise Point. He'll be so much more comfortable there." Sunrise Point was a high-end assisted living facility, known for its pristine lawns and its memory care unit. It was also known for its aggressive legal team, who often took control of residents' assets for their own protection. I drove to the farmhouse and found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a glossy Sunrise Point brochure. He looked terrified. "She's trying to put me away, Lena," he whispered. "She says I'm not of sound mind. She's got a doctor coming tomorrow to test me. She wants me to sign." "You will not sign anything," I said. "Not without me present. Do you understand?" She's very convincing," he fretted. "Grandpa," I said, putting my hands on his, Listen to me. You are not losing your mind. You are being managed. You are going to pretend to be exactly what she wants. You are going to be forgetful. You are going to be confused. You are going to tell her you need me there to explain the papers because you don't trust lawyers. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can, I said. You survived the Dust Bowl. You can survive this. Just be the confused old man she's been telling everyone you are. And he did. When her doctor came, he forgot the doctor's name 3 times. When Vivian presented him with the intake papers, he just stared at them blankly. I can't read this. Vivian, he'd said, his voice frail. The print is too small. I need Lena. She reads my mail for me. I won't sign a thing until Lena reads it. Furious, but again trapped by her own narrative of the doting, concerned stepdaughter-in-law. Vivian had no choice. She was forced to allow him to move into the facility as a temporary resident without signing over power of attorney. I visited him every single week. The nurses all thought I was a wonderful, devoted granddaughter. They didn't see that in my laptop bag. I brought him updates on the estate. They didn't see that in my pocket. I carried a small, portable USB printer. In the privacy of his new, sterile room, we held our strategy sessions. She's moving. Grandpa, I told him, showing him the wire transfer requests I'd found. She's trying to get the Aspen loan. We have one chance to stop this. The reading of the will. The addendum, he breathed, his eyes sharp and clear. The senile old man was gone. The addendum, I confirmed. But we can't trust that Harrington is the only one with a copy. We can't trust that Vivian hasn't already gotten to him. In that room, I plugged in the tiny printer. I accessed the encrypted drive, and I printed 3 identical copies of the addendum my father had signed in the hospital, the document that contained the landmine. My grandfather signed them as a witness, and I had them notarized by a mobile notary I trusted from my freelance work, using the excuse that my grandfather was updating his personal papers. We hid them. 1 copy went into my private safe deposit box. 1 copy I gave to my grandfather, who hid it inside his old farmer's almanac, and the 3rd I kept in the root cause folder, my ace in the hole. Vivian had no idea. She was busy. She was busy selecting new furniture for my father's office. She was busy meeting with bankers. She was busy preparing for her new life as the undisputed queen of Calder Ridge. She had told her inner circle that the reading of the will, scheduled for the following week, was just a formality, a simple dotting of the I's that would legally confirm what everyone already knew, that she and her son were inheriting the world. She thought it was the end of the story. I knew it was the final, critical test of the trap. The night before the reading, I stood on the small balcony of my apartment. The air was cold and sharp. I looked out over the lights of the city, a city that Vivian and Chase thought they owned. In my hands, I held the root cause binder. It was now thick, heavy, and meticulously organized. On its plain black spine, I had written a single question in pencil, a question that had been my only focus for months. If they push, where does it fall? The night before the will was to be read, I received a text message, not from Vivian's personal phone, but from her new executive assistant. Mrs. Calder requests your presence for dinner this evening to discuss your future. 8 p.m. Le Chasseur. A car will be sent. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Le Chasseur was a dark, oppressively expensive French restaurant in the financial district, a place my father had used to close deals, not to eat. The air was thick with the smell of old wine, rendered duck fat, and money. A stiff-necked host led me not to the main dining room, but to a private velvet-walled VIP room in the back. It was a claustrophobic box designed for conspiracies. Vivian was already there, seated at the head of a small formal table set for 3. She was not in mourning. She was in command. She wore a sharp black silk dress that was impossibly elegant, and around her throat was a new, cold, geometric diamond necklace I had never seen before. It was a statement of ownership. She looked, every inch, like the new CEO of Calder Ridge, which in her mind, she already was. I sat down. I was in my simple gray work blazer, my old leather laptop bag at my feet. The contrast between us was a physical chasm. "Lena, dear," she began, her voice a low, smooth purr. "Thank you for coming. I know this has been a difficult time for all of us." She gestured to the waiter, who immediately filled her wineglass. I covered mine with my hand. "Just water, please." Vivian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Of course, always so. Practical." She took a slow, theatrical sip of her wine. "I've been doing so much thinking," she sighed, the diamonds flashing against her skin. "The grief, it's, of course, overwhelming. But with it comes this crushing sense of responsibility. Thomas has left a great and complicated legacy on my shoulders, on our shoulders." She leaned forward, her expression a careful performance of intimate, shared sorrow. "The company, Calder Ridge, it's a living thing. It's delicate. It requires stability, especially now. The markets, our partners, they need to see a united front. They need to know the family is solid, that the transition will be seamless." I said nothing. I just waited. I was a data analyst. I knew how to wait for the signal in the noise. "Which brings me to you. Lena," she said, her voice dropping, as if she were about to bestow a great kindness. "We need to simplify things, for the good of the company, for the good of the family name. We need to avoid any confusion." She reached for an elegant, embossed leather portfolio beside her plate. She slid it across the table. It was thin. "Mr. Harrington has been helpful," she said. "This is just a small agreement, a formality, really. It's a waiver, dear. It just states that you agree to, well, to renounce any further claims on the estate. It keeps the share structure clean. It stops any outside party from thinking there's a dispute." I looked at the folder. I did not open it. "And in exchange?" I asked. A bright, generous smile lit her face. "In exchange, I have set up a new trust, just for you. A cute little allowance," she said, her voice patronizing. "More than that silly $5,000 a month Thomas had in his old draft. I'm thinking 10,000 every month for the rest of your life. Enough for you to have a lovely, quiet apartment, to live your simple life, to never have to worry about your little job again. You just sign, and you are taken care of. No fuss, no complications. You can just be." She sat back, her smile frozen, convinced of her own magnificent generosity. She had just offered to buy my name, my rights, and my silence, all in one clean transaction. When I still didn't speak, just looked at her, her smile tightened. The mask of the caring matriarch was beginning to fray. "Lena, you must be realistic," she said, her voice losing its warmth, taking on the hard, flat edge I knew so well. "You're a bright girl, in your own way. But this world, the world of Calder Ridge, the world of high-stakes finance, of leverage, of mergers, it's not for you. You don't have the temperament for it." She leaned in, her voice now a cruel, conspiratorial whisper. "You're not a leader. Lena, you're quiet. You're slow. You're a backroom numbers girl. And that's fine. It's wonderful. But you can't be part of this. You'd be eaten alive. My father, he knew it. He was trying to protect you. And now, I'm trying to protect you. This is your chance to step away from the big game, a game you were never meant to play." The door to the private room opened, and Chase stumbled in. He was already drunk, his tie loosened, his face flushed. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, which he drained in one swallow. "Is it done?" he asked Vivian, slurring slightly. He didn't even look at me. "We're just discussing the final points, darling," Vivian said, her composure recovered. Chase sneered. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded, crumpled copy of the same agreement. He tossed it onto the table in front of me. It landed on my bread plate. "Just sign the damn thing, Lena," he said, signaling the waiter for another drink. "Let's get this over with. It's better for everyone. You don't belong in this world. You never did." This was the 1-2 punch, her cold, psychological dismantling, followed by his brutish, drunken dismissal. They had rehearsed this. They thought this was the moment I would break, that I would cry, that I would gratefully sign away my life for their cute monthly check. Slowly, I reached for the clean, embossed folder Vivian had given me. I opened it. The document was 5 pages long. I began to read it. I did not skim. I read every line. I read the preamble, the definitions, the whereas and herefore clauses. Vivian, watching me, let out a small, impatient sigh. She probably thought I was moving my lips, struggling with the legal terms. She had no idea. I was not a daughter being intimidated. I was a forensic analyst, and this was a contract. I was reading it just as I had read Miguel's partnership agreement, just as I had read the Northline Capital deal. I saw the standard phrases. In consideration of the sum, hereby releases and discharges, and then I saw it. Page 4, Section B. The signatory, Lena Calder, agrees, in perpetuity, to waive any and all rights to contest, litigate, or file suit against the estate of Thomas Calder, Calder Ridge Developments, or its principals, officers, and heirs, including Vivian M., Calder and Chase T. Calder, for any reason whatsoever, known or unknown, for a period of no less than 20 years. 20 years. It wasn't just a waiver of inheritance. It was a gag order. It was a shield. It was a document designed to give them 2 decades of immunity, 2 decades to finish robbing my grandfather, 2 decades to run their high-risk leverage schemes, 2 decades to cover their tracks. They weren't just buying my silence about the will. They were buying my silence about root cause. They were buying my silence about VMC Holdings, about the Aspen Apex project, about everything. This document was their confession, printed on high-grade legal paper. I finished the last page. I closed the folder, very gently. I placed it on the table, perfectly aligned with the edge. I looked up. I did not look at Chase, who was already swirling his new drink. I looked directly at Vivian. And I asked the one question she was not prepared for, the one question her script had no answer for. And what if I don't sign? The air left the room. Vivian's smile didn't just fade. It cracked and fell away, like a porcelain mask dropped on cement. Her eyes, those bright, compassionate, camera-ready eyes, went flat and cold and dead. I was looking at the real Vivian, the one who had planned the theft for my grandfather, the one who had given the order to bar me from the hospital. "What?" she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "Did you just say?" "I said, what if I don't sign?" I repeated, my voice perfectly level, perfectly calm. Chase laughed, a wet, choking sound. "Then you're stupid. Lena, you're even dumber than I thought. You get nothing. You get what was it? The $5,000? Good luck with that." "Be quiet, Chase," Vivian snapped, her eyes never leaving mine. She leaned across the table. The diamonds at her throat looked like teeth. "If you don't sign," she said, enunciating every word, as if to a child, "then you need to understand what happens next. I am the head of Calder Ridge. I am the executor of this estate. I am one of the most powerful women in this city, starting tomorrow, and I will end you." She wasn't yelling. It was colder than that. It was a promise. "That little job you have, that numbers thing, I will find out where it is. I will call the partners. I will call their clients. I have relationships with every financial firm, every bank, every auditing house in this state. I will personally inform them that you are unstable, that you are litigious, that you are a disgrace to your family name. By the time I am done, Lena, you will not be able to get a job auditing a lemonade stand in this town. You will be a pariah. You will have nothing." She sat back, breathing hard, her face flushed with her own venom. She had finally shown her entire hand. It was a threat of total annihilation. I held her gaze for a long, silent moment. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to burst into tears, to grab the pen, to beg her forgiveness. I smiled, just a small, light, almost imperceptible smile. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "Well," I said, standing up, my voice still quiet, still calm. "I suppose tomorrow will be more complicated for the lawyers than we thought." I picked up my laptop bag. "You're not signing?" Chase sputtered, half rising from his chair. "Enjoy your dinner, Vivian," I said, turning to the door. "Thank you for the offer." I walked out of the private room. I walked through the hushed, expensive dining room, past the staring host, and out into the cold, clean night air of the city. I did not run. I did not look back. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The sound of the traffic a welcome, real-world noise. I pulled out my phone. At the table, in the 2 seconds that Chase had turned to order his drink, I had placed the 5-page contract flat on the table and taken a perfect, high-resolution snapshot of each page. I stood there, under a streetlight. I opened the encrypted mail app on my phone. I attached the 5 images. I sent them to my private, secure server, to the file where everything else lived. Subject: Evidence, Addendum, Waiver, Draft. I added one more piece to the puzzle, one more nail for their coffin. The reading of the will was in less than 12 hours. We are back. Back in the 42nd floor conference room at Harrington and Wells, the haze over Denver has thickened, pressing against the glass, making the room feel even more like a tomb. The players are arranged as they were. Vivian, a vision in black, composed and regal at the center of the table. Chase, beside her, looking hungover, his jaw tight, my grandfather. Edward, at the far end, his hands folded on his cane, a silent, fragile statue. And me, Lena Calder, at the edge, separate, my laptop bag at my feet. Mr. Harrington, the family lawyer, sits at the head, flanked by 2 other associates from the firm, a pale young woman and a stern-looking older man, here as legal witnesses. The air is cold. Mr. Harrington cracks the creamy, thick binding of the will. The sound is like a bone breaking. "We are gathered," he begins, his voice a dry monotone, "to read the final will and testament of Thomas Calder. This document, executed on." He drones on, the legal preambles washing over me. I watch the light. "First," Harrington says, "to my son, Chase Thomas Calder." He outlines the bequeathment. The Aspen House is his, free and clear. A seat on the board of directors of Calder Ridge Developments, a significant portfolio of stocks. Chase allows himself a small, tight smile, running a finger under his collar. "Second," Harrington continues, turning a page, "to my daughter, Lena Calders." I feel the shift. Every eye in the room, including the witnesses, moves to me. I bequeath the condominium apartment located at 1450 Arbor Street, Unit 2B, to be hers, free and clear. I further bequeath a monthly allowance to be paid from the estate's general fund in the sum of $5,000. He continues, but the words are just static. A small apartment in a nondescript building the company owns, a monthly check. It is exactly what my father promised me in that hospital room, an insult, an exile. Harrington's voice moves on, confirming what I already know. No shares, no voting rights, no further claims. And finally, Harrington says, all the rest, all remaining properties, real and personal, all assets, all shares, including the controlling interest, I bequeath to my beloved, devoted wife, Vivian Calder. I also name her as executor of my estate. A collective, silent exhale fills the room. It is done. The empire has been transferred. Vivian, the new queen, closes her eyes for a moment, a perfect, calculated gesture of being overwhelmed. She presses a black-gloved finger to her eye. Then, she turns to me. Her face is a mask of profound, generous, winning sorrow. "Oh, Lena," she says, her voice thick with pity. "I know. I know it must seem unfair. But your father, he just wanted you to be safe. He worried so much about you. He knew you weren't built for this." She reaches across the table, as if to pat my hand, but I am too far away. "But I will always take care of you. You know that." She beams, a benevolent monarch. "Money isn't everything, is it? It's about family, and I'm so glad we had our little talk last night. I'm so glad we have an agreement to keep things simple, to keep the family stable." She is talking about the waiver. She is trying to box me in, to get me to nod, to validate her story in front of the lawyers. She is waiting for me to cry. She is waiting for me to look defeated, to gratefully accept the scraps from her table. I just sit there. I let her performance hang in the air for a moment. Then I turn my gaze, not to her, but to Mr. Harrington. My voice is perfectly level. "At least he was honest," I say, the words cutting into the silent, perfumed air. "At least he was finally honest about how he saw me." The reaction is instantaneous. Vivian's smile freezes, cracks. This is not the script. This is not the scene she wrote. I was supposed to be a puddle of grateful tears. I was supposed to be broken. My calm is an act of defiance. My analysis is an insult. Before she can retort, Chase, hung over and high on his new power, leans forward on his elbows. "What's that supposed to mean?" he sneers, his voice a low, ugly rasp. "Ungrateful. Just like always. Dad gives you a free ride for 30 years, and you sit here and insult him after he's dead?" He looks around the table, playing to the witnesses. "He was right, you know. He knew you were weak. You're a parasite. Lena, you've always been a parasite. Have you ever earned a single meaningful dollar in your life? You're just overhead. You're a leech he was finally cutting off." Parasite. The word hangs in the room, ugly and sharp. Vivian's wounded ego, already pricked by my comment, now latches onto his. Her son has set the stage. Her face, which was pale, flushes a dark, angry red. She stands up. The scrape of her chair is a shriek of rage. "How dare you?" she hisses. She isn't talking to Chase. She is talking to me. "How dare you sit there with your silent, sullen judgment, after everything I have done for you, after I tried to help you last night, to give you a soft landing, to give you a life." She is walking now, prowling. She is coming around the table, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I took you in," she shouts, her voice breaking, the polished news anchor gone, replaced by something raw and venomous. "I gave you a home. I gave you a family. And you were always this stain, this sullen, ungrateful reminder of a past he wanted to forget, a problem he left for me to clean up, over and over." She is in front of me now. I can smell her perfume, the same cloying, expensive scent from the hospital. She is panting, her eyes wide, her perfectly manacled hands clenched into fists. She has completely lost control. "You think you're better than us?" she screams. Her face inches from mine. "You, with your little job? You are nothing!" And then she swings. The sound of her heavy gold rings connecting with my cheekbone is a dry, sharp crack. It echoes in the 42nd floor silence. The entire room freezes. My head snaps to the side. A blossom of white-hot, stinging fire erupts on my skin, on the table. The water in my glass shivers, tiny rings breaking the surface. Mr. Harrington's mouth is wide open, a perfect O of shock. The young paralegal beside him makes a small, high-pitched sound, like a mouse. Chase. Chase looks stunned, not horrified, just completely, utterly surprised that his mother, his perfect, controlled mother, would do this, here, in front of the lawyers. I let the silence stretch. 1 beat, 2 beats. The red mark on my face is blooming, a hot, visible brand. I do not touch it. I do not cry. Slowly, deliberately. I turn my head back. I look past Vivian's panting, furious face. I look to the head of the table. My voice is perfectly clear. It does not shake. "Grandpa," I ask, "did you see that?" I turn my gaze to the lawyer. "Mr. Harrington, as a legal witness to this reading, did you see that?" A new sound breaks the stillness. Ahem. Every eye in the room, including Vivian's, pivots to the end of the table. My grandfather, Edward Calder, who has been a ghost, places his weathered hands on the arms of his chair. He pushes himself up. He is slow. His joints ache, and he leans heavily on his cane. But he stands. "Mr. Harrington," my grandfather says. His voice is not the frail rasp of an old man. It is the firm, clear voice of the man who built an empire from dust. As a legal witness to this proceeding, I can confirm, as can your associates, that my granddaughter, Lena Calder, was just physically assaulted by Mrs. Vivian Calder. Vivian, her mind reeling, her hand still tingling, is confused. "What? What is this? Edward, sit down. You're senile. You're confused." He ignores her. He is not looking at her. He is looking at Mr. Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," my grandfather commands. "We spoke of this last year. Open the addendum, the conditional page." He reaches down to the old, worn leather briefcase at his feet, the same one he had in the hospital. He pulls out a single, thin, sealed manila envelope, the one my father signed across the seal. He slides it down the polished mahogany table. It stops directly in front of the lawyer. Harrington's hands are visibly trembling. He knows exactly what this is. He was the one who drafted it. "What is that?" Vivian demands, her voice rising into a shrill panic. "I am the executor. I forbid this. That is not part of the will." "You are not the executor yet, Mrs. Calder," Mr. Harrington says, his voice suddenly ice cold. His loyalty, which was to the power, has just seen the power shift. He picks up the envelope. He shows the intact, signed seal to the witnesses. "This," he says, "is a legally binding addendum to the last will and testament of Thomas Calder." He breaks the seal. He unfolds the single page. Chase is on his feet. "What? This is a joke. He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. She tricked him. They tricked him." "Mr. Calder, please be silent," Harrington snaps. "Your father anticipated this objection." He reaches into his own briefcase and pulls out his private tablet. He was of perfectly sound mind, and he had me record the signing. He taps the screen. The room is filled with the sound of a hospital room, the beeping monitors, and my father's voice, weak, rasping, but legally, terrifyingly clear. "I, Thomas Calder." His voice fills the room. Being of sound mind, but in failing health, I am signing this addendum to protect my daughter, Lena, from the cruelty I failed to see. I am in my right mind, and this is my final, binding decision. So help me God. The video clicks off. Chase is speechless. Vivian is hyperventilating. She looks at Harrington, at me, at Edward. This is a joke. You can't." The slap? That was a family matter. A minor. I lost my temper. Harrington shakes his head. He holds up the single page. He begins to read. "Addendum to the last will and testament of Thomas Calder," he reads, his voice clear and formal. "It is my final decree that should, during the official reading of my will, my wife, Vivian Calder, or my son, Chase Calder, commit any act of physical violence or any act of extreme deliberate and public humiliation against my daughter, Lena Calder, then all designated bequeathments, all properties, all assets, and all shares listed for that aggressing party shall be immediately rendered null and void." The silence in the room is absolute. It is a vacuum. Vivian's face is no longer pale. It is the color of ash. And Harrington continues, "In such an event, all voided assets shall be transferred, in their entirety, into a new entity, the Calder Edward Trust. The trustees, managers, and sole beneficiaries of this trust shall be my father, Edward Calder, and my daughter, Lena Calder. He finishes reading. He carefully places the page down and aligns it with the main will. They are now one document. He looks up. He does not look at me. He does not look at my grandfather. He looks directly at the woman who, 5 minutes ago, was the most powerful person in the room. Mrs. Calder, he says, his voice devoid of any emotion, any loyalty, any warmth. The condition was any act of physical violence. The condition was met. It was witnessed by 3 members of the Colorado Bar. The addendum is now active. He taps the page. According to the law, and according to this legally binding and verified document, as of this moment, you are no longer the primary heir to the estate of Thomas Calder. We are back in the 42nd floor conference room at Harrington and Wells. The haze over Denver has thickened, pressing against the glass, making the room feel even more like a tomb. The players are arranged as they were. Vivian, a vision in black, composed and regal at the center of the table. Chase, beside her, looking hungover, his jaw tight. My grandfather, Edward, at the far end, his hands folded on his cane. A silent, fragile statue. And me, Lena Calder, at the edge, separate, my laptop bag at my feet. Mr. Harrington, the family lawyer, sits at the head, flanked by 2 other associates from the firm, a pale young woman and a stern-looking older man, here as legal witnesses. The air is cold. Mr. Harrington cracks the creamy, thick binding of the will. The sound is like a bone breaking. We are gathered, he begins, his voice a dry monotone, to read the final will and testament of Thomas Calder. This document, executed on. He drones on, the legal preambles washing over me. I watch the light. First, Harrington says, to my son, Chase Thomas Calder. He outlines the bequeathment. The Aspen House is his, free and clear. A seat on the board of directors of Calder Ridge Developments, a significant portfolio of stocks. Chase allows himself a small, tight smile, running a finger under his collar. Second, Harrington continues, turning a page, to my daughter, Lena Calder. I feel the shift. Every eye in the room, including the witnesses, moves to me. I bequeath the condominium apartment located at 1450 Arbor Street, Unit 2B, to be hers, free and clear. I further bequeath a monthly allowance, to be paid from the estate's general fund, in the sum of $5,000. He continues, but the words are just static. A small apartment in a nondescript building the company owns, a monthly check. It is exactly what my father promised me in that hospital room, an insult, an exile. Harrington's voice moves on, confirming what I already know. No shares, no voting rights, no further claims. And finally, Harrington says, all the rest, all remaining properties, real and personal, all assets, all shares, including the controlling interest, I bequeath to my beloved, devoted wife, Vivian Calder. I also name her as executor of my estate. A collective, silent exhale fills the room. It is done. The empire has been transferred. Vivian, the new queen, closes her eyes for a moment, a perfect, calculated gesture of being overwhelmed. She presses a black-gloved finger to her eye. Then she turns to me. Her face is a mask of profound, generous, winning sorrow. Oh, Lena, she says, her voice thick with pity. I know it must seem unfair, but your father, he just wanted you to be safe. He worried so much about you. He knew you weren't built for this. She reaches across the table, as if to pat my hand, but I am too far away. But I will always take care of you. You know that, she beams, a benevolent monarch. Money isn't everything, is it? It's about family, and I'm so glad we had our little talk last night. I'm so glad we have an agreement to keep things simple, to keep the family stable. She is talking about the waiver. She is trying to box me in, to get me to nod, to validate her story in front of the lawyers. She is waiting for me to cry. She is waiting for me to look defeated, to gratefully accept the scraps from her table. I just sit there. I let her performance hang in the air for a moment. Then I turn my gaze, not to her, but to Mr. Harrington. My voice is perfectly level. At least he was honest, I say, the words cutting into the silent, perfumed air. At least he was finally honest about how he saw me. The reaction is instantaneous. Vivian's smile freezes, cracks. This is not the script. This is not the scene she wrote. I was supposed to be a puddle of grateful tears. I was supposed to be broken. My calm is an act of defiance. My analysis is an insult. Before she can retort, Chase, hung over and high on his new power, leans forward on his elbows. "What's that supposed to mean?" he sneers, his voice a low, ugly rasp. "Ungrateful. Just like always. Dad gives you a free ride for 30 years, and you sit here and insult him after he's dead?" He looks around the table, playing to the witnesses. "He was right. You know, he knew you were weak. You're a parasite. Lena, you've always been a parasite. Have you ever earned a single meaningful dollar in your life? You're just overhead. You're a leech he was finally cutting off." Parasite. The word hangs in the room, ugly and sharp. Vivian's wounded ego, already pricked by my comment, now latches onto his. Her son has set the stage. Her face, which was pale, flushes a dark, angry red. She stands up. The scrape of her chair is a shriek of rage. "How dare you?" she hisses. She isn't talking to Chase. She is talking to me. "How dare you sit there with your silent, sullen judgment after everything I have done for you, after I tried to help you, last night, to give you a soft landing, to give you a life." She is walking now, prowling. She is coming around the table, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I took you in," she shouts, her voice breaking, the polished news anchor gone, replaced by something raw and venomous. "I gave you a home. I gave you a family. And you were always this stain, this sullen, ungrateful reminder of a past he wanted to forget, a problem he left for me to clean up, over and over." She is in front of me now. I can smell her perfume, the same cloying, expensive scent from the hospital. She is panting, her eyes wide, her perfectly manacled hands clenched into fists. She has completely lost control. "You think you're better than us?" she screams, her face inches from mine. "You, with your little job? You are nothing." And then she swings. The sound of her heavy gold rings connecting with my cheekbone is a dry, sharp crack. It echoes in the 42nd floor silence. The entire room freezes. My head snaps to the side. A blossom of white-hot, stinging fire erupts on my skin. On the table, the water in my glass shivers, tiny rings breaking the surface. Mr. Harrington's mouth is wide open, a perfect O of shock. The young paralegal beside him makes a small, high-pitched sound, like a mouse. Chase. Chase looks stunned, not horrified, just completely, utterly surprised that his mother, his perfect, controlled mother, would do this. Here, in front of the lawyers. I let the silence stretch. 1 beat, 2 beats. The red mark on my face is blooming, a hot, visible brand. I do not touch it. I do not cry. Slowly, deliberately, I turn my head back. I look past Vivian's panting, furious face. I look to the head of the table. My voice is perfectly clear. It does not shake. "Grandpa," I ask, "did you see that?" I turn my gaze to the lawyer. "Mr. Harrington, as a legal witness to this reading, did you see that?" A new sound breaks the stillness, a hem. Every eye in the room, including Vivian's, pivots to the end of the table. My grandfather, Edward Calder, who has been a ghost, places his weathered hands on the arms of his chair. He pushes himself up. He is slow. His joints ache, and he leans heavily on his cane. But he stands. "Mr. Harrington," my grandfather says. His voice is not the frail rasp of an old man. It is the firm, clear voice of the man who built an empire from dust. As a legal witness to this proceeding, I can confirm, as can your associates, that my granddaughter, Lena Calder, was just physically assaulted by Mrs. Vivian Calder. Vivian, her mind reeling, her hand still tingling, is confused. "What? What is this? Edward, sit down. You're senile. You're confused." He ignores her. He is not looking at her. He is looking at Mr. Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," my grandfather commands. "We spoke of this last year. Open the addendum, the conditional page." He reaches down to the old, worn leather briefcase at his feet, the same one he had in the hospital. He pulls out a single, thin, sealed manila envelope, the one my father signed across the seal. He slides it down the polished mahogany table. It stops directly in front of the lawyer. Harrington's hands are visibly trembling. He knows exactly what this is. He was the one who drafted it. "What is that?" Vivian demands, her voice rising into a shrill panic. "I am the executor. I forbid this. That is not part of the will." "You are not the executor yet, Mrs. Calder," Mr. Harrington says, his voice suddenly ice-cold. His loyalty, which was to the power, has just seen the power shift. He picks up the envelope. He shows the intact, signed seal to the witnesses. "This," he says, "is a legally binding addendum to the last will and testament of Thomas Calder." He breaks the seal. He unfolds the single page. Chase is on his feet. "What? This is a joke! He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. She tricked him. They tricked him." "Mr. Calder, please be silent," Harrington snaps. "Your father anticipated this objection." He reaches into his own briefcase and pulls out his private tablet. He was of perfectly sound mind, and he had me record the signing. He taps the screen. The room is filled with the sound of a hospital room, the beeping monitors, and my father's voice, weak, rasping, but legally, terrifyingly clear. "I, Thomas Calder." His voice fills the room. Being of sound mind, but in failing health, I am signing this addendum to protect my daughter, Lena, from the cruelty I failed to see. I am doing this to ensure Lena is not hurt again, not one more time, by the money I am leaving behind. She is the only one I trust to fix it. This is my will. This is my penance. The video clicks off. Chase is speechless. Vivian is hyperventilating. She looks at Harrington, at me, at Edward. This is a joke. You can't. The slap? That was a family matter. A minor. I lost my temper." Harrington shakes his head. He holds up the single page. He begins to read. "Addendum to the last will and testament of Thomas Calder," he reads, his voice clear and formal. "It is my final decree that should, during the official reading of my will, my wife, Vivian Calder, or my son, Chase Calder, commit any act of physical violence or any act of extreme, deliberate, and public humiliation against my daughter, Lena Calder, then all designated bequeathments, all properties, all assets, and all shares listed for that aggressing party shall be immediately rendered null and void." The silence in the room is absolute. It is a vacuum. Vivian's face is no longer pale. It is the color of ash. "And psst," Harrington continues, "in such an event, all voided assets shall be transferred, in their entirety, into a new entity, the Calder Edward Trust. The trustees, managers, and sole beneficiaries of this trust shall be my father, Edward Calder, and my daughter, Lena Calder." He finishes reading. He carefully places the page down and aligns it with the main will. They are now one document. He looks up. He does not look at me. He does not look at my grandfather. He looks directly at the woman who, 5 minutes ago, was the most powerful person in the room. "Mrs. Calder," he says, his voice devoid of any emotion, any loyalty, any warmth. The condition was any act of physical violence. The condition was met. It was witnessed by 3 members of the Colorado Bar. The addendum is now active. He taps the page. According to the law, and according to this legally binding and verified document, as of this moment, you are no longer the primary heir to the estate of Thomas Calder. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm really curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect. And please share your thoughts on the story. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.